In this lesson, we are going to use the cosine law to help us solve triangles. Yesterday, we were solving for some non-right angle triangles, so in that case, we had to use the sine law. But sometimes that might not work, so in that case, you're going to have to use something called the cosine law. Now, when do you use this? Well, you use the cosine law if you're given a triangle with two sides and a contained angle. So for example, in this triangle, we are given this side right here and that side. So two sides and an angle in between them. Now, because this angle is in between the two sides, it's called a contained angle. Now, another reason why you might have to use the cosine law is when you are given a triangle that has three sides. So for example, in this triangle right here, we've been given 1, 2, and 3 sides all together. So in this case, we would also have to use the cosine law. Here is the formula for cosine law. Now on the left-hand side, you will find the formula that will help you find the sides of a triangle. And on the right-hand side, that formula will help you find the angles. Now you might feel like this is too much memorization, so let's make things simple. All you really need to do is memorize this equation right here and rearrange it to find the angles. So the angle basically deals with this part right here, cos of angle C. So that will help us find the angle. But because it's attached to 2AB, we're going to have to take the whole thing and move it to the other side. And then we'll take the C squared and move that to the right-hand side. So we're basically switching the two. Now, because we're moving the negative 2AB cos of C to the left-hand side, it's going to become positive. So positive 2AB times cos of angle C on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you have A squared plus B squared. And when we move the positive C squared, it becomes negative C squared. Now, I want cos of angle C by itself, but the 2AB is attached to it. So to get rid of it, I'm going to divide this side by 2AB, and I'm going to divide the other side also by 2AB. On the left-hand side, you can cancel those two out, so you're left with cos of C. And on the right-hand side, you have A squared plus B squared minus C squared all over 2AB. And there's your equation. In this question, we are given a triangle that has two sides and a contained angle in the middle. So we are going to use the cosine law. I'm going to start off by labeling the sides. So this is little d. Now the side across from angle E is little e. And the side across from angle F is little f. So the sides have been labeled in lowercase letters. Now, if you remember, the actual cosine law looks something like this. Minus 2AB times cos of angle C. But there's a problem here. Notice we don't have an angle C or side C on our triangle. So we're going to have to adjust this equation a little bit. What we do have is a side D. So anytime I see C, I'm going to substitute with D instead. And notice we've got A and B here, but it's not on our triangle. Instead, we have E and F. So I'm going to substitute AB with E and F. So depending on what triangle you get, you're going to have to adjust your cosine law. Okay, so now let's start out by finding side D. Now the new equation is going to be D squared is equal to E squared plus F squared minus 2 times EF times cos of angle D in capital letters. Okay, so now let's substitute the actual numbers. Now D is just plain D, so I'm going to write D squared here. Now E is right here, which happens to be 9, so I'm going to write 9 squared. Plus F, well F happens to be 8, so I'm going to write 8 squared. Minus 2 times E, well E is 9, times F, which is 8, times cos of angle D. Well, angle D is right here, and that happens to be 71 degrees. So I'm going to write 71 degrees. Okay, so now let's calculate further. I'm going to leave the D squared as it is. 9 squared is 81. 8 squared is 64. Minus, now let's multiply that out. That comes to 144 times cos of 71 degrees. Okay, let's calculate it even further. So leave the D squared. And 81 plus 64 comes to about 145. Minus 144 times cos of 71 degrees. Now the next part is very important. Do not, and I repeat, do not subtract 145 with 144. Okay, we don't do that first. Because notice we've got this section here, which means you've got to multiply the 144 with cos of 71. So do the multiplication first. So leave the d squared, leave the 145, and when you multiply all of this, you end up with about 46.88. I'm going to round it. All right, now you can subtract this. So d squared is equal to, and that comes to about 98.12. Now I want to get rid of the d squared, so to do that, I'm going to have to square root this side, and I'm going to have to square root the right side as well. Square root of d squared is d, and square root of 98.12 comes to 9.91, and don't forget the units, meters. So I'm going to write that on my triangle. That's side D is 9.91 meters. Now let's move on to find angle E. Now if you remember, the actual equation for angles looks something like this. But once again, we don't have side C at all. So wherever I see E, I'm going to substitute with E instead. And also we don't have A and B, so I'm going to substitute that with D and F. All right, so let's rewrite this equation with the substitution. So we're going to write cos of angle E is equal to, and instead of a squared, we're going to write d squared plus f squared minus e squared. All of that over 2 times d times f. Now let's substitute the letters with actual numbers. So let's write cos of angle E. Well, E is just E because we don't know what it is, so we're going to leave it as capital E. Is equal to, next we have d squared. Well, d happens to be 9.91, so we're going to write 9.91 squared instead. Now next we have plus f squared. Well, f we know happens to be 8, so we're going to write 8 squared instead. Minus e squared, and e happens to be 9 meters, so we're going to write 9 squared instead of e squared. All of that over 2 times d, which is 9.91, times f, which is 8. Okay, so leave the cos of e as it is, and now let's find the square of 9.91, which comes to about 98.2081, plus 8 squared, which happens to be 64, minus 9 squared, which is 81. Now let's multiply all the bottom numbers together, and when you do that, you should get about 158.56. All right, so now let's go further. So again, cos of angle E, and I'm going to add and subtract all the top numbers together all at once, and when you do that, you get about 81.2081. All of that divided by 158.56. Okay, since I'm running out of room, I'm just going to write some more work over here. Now, we are trying to find angle E. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do cos inverse of bracket 81.2081 divided by 158.56. And now when you plug this into your calculator, I'm just going to round it up to a whole number. So angle E comes to about 59 degrees. So we have found angle E. I'm going to write that in the triangle. So that's 59 degrees. Now the last thing we need to find is angle F. So let's write that over here, angle F. Now you can use the cosine law, but again, there's an easier method because we have been given 2 angles, and the third angle, if you were to add them all, it comes to 180 degrees. So to find angle F, we're just going to do 180 degrees minus the 71 degrees minus the 59 degrees. And when you calculate this all together, your angle F actually comes to around 50 degrees. So let's put that in the triangle as well. And now we have solved the question. In this question, we have a triangle with 3 sides, so we're going to use the cosine law. I'm going to start off by labeling the sides. So we've got angle A here, and across from it is side A, so that's going to be in lowercase letters. And across from angle B, we've got side B, and across from angle C, we've got the little c, meaning side C. Now let's find angle C first of the triangle. So let's write that down, angle C. And the formula for this, we're going to use the cosine law, which is cos of angle C is equal to a squared plus b squared minus c squared, all of that over 2 times a times b. Okay, so now let's fill in the values. Now angle C, we don't have a number for it, so we're just going to leave it as cos of angle C. And then a squared, well, a happens to be 9, so we're going to write 9 squared. Plus b squared, well, b is 5, so we're going to write 5 squared. Minus c squared, and c happens to be 7, so we're going to write 7 squared. All of that over 2 times a, which happens to be 9, and times b, which is 5. Now let's calculate this. So I'm going to leave cos of angle C as it is, and 9 squared is 81, plus 5 squared, which is 25, minus 7 squared, which is 49. Now let's multiply the bottom numbers together. 2 times 9 times 5 comes to 90. Okay, so again, let's calculate some more. So cos of C, and I'm going to calculate the numbers on top, which comes to 57. All of that over 90. Now that we're finding angle C, we're going to write angle C is equal to cos inverse of brackets 57 divided by 90. Now you can plug this into your calculator, and when you do that, angle C should come to about 51 degrees. So let's write that in our triangle. So angle C is 51 degrees. Next, I'm going to try to find angle B, so let's write that down. Now the equation for angle B is going to be a little bit different. Instead of writing cos of C, I'm going to write cos of angle B, because that's what I'm trying to find. A squared, but instead of writing b squared, I'm going to write c squared instead. And instead of writing minus c squared, I'm going to write minus b squared. All of that over 2 times a times c. So notice the difference in this equation. I've changed this side to be capital B, and this to be b squared, and the bottom to be c instead of b. So I'm basically switching the b and the c's. All right, so now let's fill in the numbers. So cos of angle B, which is just angle B, is equal to a squared, which we know is 9, so we're going to write 9 squared, plus c squared, which we know happens to be 7, so we're going to write 7 squared, minus, and b happens to be 5, so minus 5 squared. All of that over 2 times a, which is 9, times c, which is 7. Okay, so now let's calculate this. So cos of b is equal to 9 squared is 81, plus 49, minus 25. Now let's multiply the bottom numbers together, and when you do that, you should get 126. Okay, let's calculate some more. So cos of b is equal to, now let's deal with the top numbers, and you end up with 105 over 126. Now to find angle B, you are going to write cos inverse of brackets 105 divided by 126. And when you calculate this on your calculator, your angle B comes to around 34 degrees. So let's write that in the triangle. Now we only have one more angle to find, which is angle A. So I'm going to start writing that, angle A. Now you can use the cosine law, but there is an easier way. Because notice we've been given 2 angles, and all 3 angles add up to 180. So to find angle A, we're just going to take the 180 and subtract the others from it. So 180 minus 51 degrees minus 34 degrees. And when you calculate that, angle A comes to 95 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to put that in my triangle here, and I've solved the question.